Online entertainment, it's a little isolating. We need to reprogram desire. Having a different sense of what is satisfying and what gives you pride has to be structured differently. It's a different retail environment than, stores being warehouses. Emergence of powerful technology in the hands of individual and emerging designers really means that it can launch a collection without having $500,000 to get started. If AI is going to be of benefit, it's going to be of benefit there.
Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Michael Ferraro, the Executive Director of New York's Fashion Institute of Technology's D-Tech Lab. Before FIT, Michael was among the first to work in film computer graphics. He worked on Tron, the first feature film to use computer animation, and later co-founded Blue Sky Studios, which created animation software used in movies like Ice Age and Epic. That was later acquired by Fox. And now he works at the D-Tech Lab, where he has led over 200 students and 50 projects in collaboration with major players like Tommy Hilfiger, Adidas, IBM Watson, and Major League Baseball. Michael's career beautifully marries artistry and tech innovation, making him a top voice in the future of fashion and technology. Michael, it's a pleasure to be chatting with you again after a few weeks that we've met in New York. How are you doing?
I'm great. Nice to see you, and thanks for inviting me on.
No, it is my pleasure, especially after having after those wonderful chats we had in New York. A lot around what an amazing journey you've had. It is really impressive how you've managed to go from art, because you did start as an artist, if I'm not mistaken, to animation, um, to now academia and specifically fashion tech, and that's how I want to start this chat, because I'm curious, what is the driver? What makes you shift? What makes you reinvent yourself? Do you see it like that? Is it by chance or is it by design?
A really good question, and it's quite a journey. And art and art practice and an art mindset always informs what I do. It's transformed. I was very early on involved in technology and working with Moog synthesizers back in the late 70s. As I often say, I made my first picture with a computer in 1969.
Wow.
And that's really a long time
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
And while, it wasn't much of a picture, it was just a mathematical plot of a three-dimensional form. It set me in motion for all the years that I've been involved in it. But really, what I was very early on influenced by a couple of exhibitions that I was able to see just as I was finishing high school. And there was an important exhibition by Robert Smithson in the Newark Museum, which was really quite moving and really unlike anything I had ever seen before. This giant pile of dirt in the middle of the museum, which was conceptually so jarring and engaging at the same time. But it meant that somebody was speaking a language that was very different than what I had learned in high school. And with following that, I was able to see some of the early New York kinetic film festivals, which were taking place at Philharmonic Hall. And they were really interesting early experiments. And Charles and Ray Ames's famous piece called Powers of 10, where the camera starts and zooms out at units of 10 all the way through the universe and then comes flying back. Really another kind of seminal moment in kind of giving me an idea of how to think about things differently, how to see things differently. And then there was another important exhibition in and around that same time that was at the Museum of Modern Art. It was called Spaces. And again, it was a conceptual art, performance, installation kind of melange of different thinking. And one work in particular was done by an architectural group called Pulsa. And they had done this kinetic light sound environment in the garden. And the garden was a beautiful place, and seeing the sound made you feel like you were transformed into some other world. And so those sorts of early experiences really shaped a lot of what I think about. And one other thing, one other artist I can mention, which of particular importance, is a artist named Nicholas Schaffer, who
Okay.
had done a performance of an autonomous robot on stage at Lincoln Center in the 60s,
Wow, that's
which was
crazy.
just like something I had never conceptualized before. And Jean Tinguely,
Yeah.
who did the beautiful work with a homage to New York, which destroyed itself and did these great machines that would draw and take the drawing away from you. So there was a lot of playfulness in his work, and those sorts of themes really kind of were a big part of how I initiated. And then in going to, I went to an art school in Newark, which was a very traditional art school that had been made famous by a period of painters called the Ashcan School. And I was there, and it was an intense program, but I was thinking differently.
In what way? What do you
They
mean?
didn't know what to make of me. And soon after that, I transferred up to Syracuse. And that's when I started to really find a way to integrate technology and artistic expression. And that was really, I spent a lot of time, I developed my own curriculum.
Okay, that's cool. What do
But
you
it
think? I
was,
mean, it was that something that you continued to pursue for a long time before you moved into animation, or was it a shift immediately after school?
It's an interesting progression because I started making pictures, as I mentioned, and that was in high school. But when I got to Syracuse, I was able to utilize computers that could draw and could draw reasonably well. And there was an interesting program that I was using at the time, one of the earliest art programs it was called Explore. It was developed by a guy named Ken Knowlton. And in the process of making the images, I started to transition onto a display, because up that time, most everything you did was on paper.
Yeah.
And your prints came out on paper. Eventually, we had got a plotter, which was like a giant Etch-a-Sketch, which would draw, but it was all line drawings. But
Yeah.
and on the display, there was something more dynamic, and I started to experiment with, again, mathematical forms, because they were very easy to start with. And I created an animation with a Bolex camera sitting in front of this display, one frame at a time, clicking off the rotation of a four-dimensional sphere
Wow,
through
that's
space.
amazing.
Now, I didn't know enough about the math to know how accurate and how good I was doing, but it was like, oh, these are wild shapes.
Yeah.
And I made this short film, and that really was the first time I started using computers to make moving images.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's interesting if you think of generative AI, for example, today. I cannot help to make the connection. There is a lot of controversy around, is this art if it's being fully generated by a computer? And back then, was there a similar reaction of almost as, like a pushback to art being generated or in a display?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I do think the dialogue today is different than then,
Yeah.
because with generative AI, the source material is often other people's work. So there
Mhm.
is plenty of controversy in and around that. It also, but we can talk about that
Yeah.
later. But yes, there was a lot of resistance to what were called at the time experiments in art and technology. And there was a
Mhm.
big wave of it that came through. There was a tremendous biennale in Sao Paulo that was an early confluence of a lot of artists that were experimenting in art and technology. And it
Okay.
clearly demonstrated some of the challenges, because about 70% of the pieces didn't work. So, and that was an ongoing problem. So not only were
Yeah.
people a little bit critical and derisive of the fact that it didn't follow any sort of classical notion
Yeah.
of art, but that it was prone to failure.
Yeah, of course. How long do you stay in that move, and how do you jump into animation, computer graphics?
So as I was continuing on through my master's degree at UMass, which ultimately my master's performance was a tap dance at electronic music performance.
Stop. No.
Uh,
What?
it was really a lot of fun. And I'm on stage with a big Moog synthesizer in front of a live audience of a few hundred
Wow.
people. It
Are there
was just,
videos of this?
I have photos. Back then, video was a little harder to take.
Yeah.
But so, in doing the work that I was doing, I was really looking at early systems that were used for developing images, but also
Hmm.
animation started to become something that it was kind of important to what I was doing. And eventually I went to work after I graduated and I got my master's, my MFA. I went to a company that they were responsible for commissioning the first ever real-time simulator. It was,
Okay.
people think of it as a flight simulator. It was used shortly after for flight simulation. But when I was working with it, it was a ship navigation trainer. And that for me was a deep introduction into real time and
Hmm.
how graphics and animation would be computed on the fly and were responsive to your controls. And that really was an important and key moment in making that transition out of just thinking about artworks for their pure expression to understanding I needed to make a living.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had just gotten married. Being an artist is not the easiest proposition.
Yeah.
So I went to work for a big engineering company. I did a bunch of analysis on this early flight simulator, and I had done a lot of early experimentation with the development of textures.
Mm.
And I borrowed from my experience in electronic music and started. We use frequency modulation to make rich sounds in electronic music. And I said, "Huh, I wonder if I can do that with pictures." And off I went, starting to create these very dynamic texture patterns that were computed from functions. And that, between that and my overall experience with different computers that were making pictures, I got a job at a big engineering company. And that's what I mentioned was it was called Sperry Systems Management, and they had the first Evans and Sutherland real-time navigation trainer.
That's
So
amazing.
doing that for a
Yeah.
few years, it was actually just 2 years that I did that, and realized that engineering moves at a different pace, and rightly so. I'm not faulting it, but I was thinking that okay, it's going to be about 10 years before I get to do anything really
Yeah.
exciting, and that's when I came across Magi, and boy, what a weird coincidence. I have to digress
Why?
just a little bit on
Yeah,
this coincidence.
please.
So when I was at Syracuse, I bought a car. I bought
Okay.
a car from somebody. Um, I parked it. I didn't go through the process of registration and whatnot. I took it out one day. Bunch of people, convertible down, really tooling around. Went to see an art show down at the Everson Museum.
Yeah.
These get me. They're like, "You're driving without a registration and insurance." I went, "Oh Jesus, what am I
Oh my
thinking?"
God.
Of course, they went back to the owner of the car. He was a little upset. Now that fellow had just left Syracuse to go work with his father's company.
Okay.
That company was called Magi. It was the
Wow.
company that I went to afterwards, and he and I meet face to face
Wow.
after, and he's like, "Oh, you were the one with the car." I'm like,
That's
"Yes,
incredible.
that was me." So that was a very funny, but Magi was a really exciting place because a lot of creative people came from such a diverse range of backgrounds were
Mm.
working together to really do some of the first things that had ever been done. And that Magi was the company that produced Tron. And
Yeah.
Tron was the first feature film to ever use computer animation. And it was amazing that we had done small commercials
Hmm.
before that, but it was an amazing opportunity to really be able to do something that just had never been done before. And if you watch Tron today, you will see that stuff looked really good. And it
Yeah.
was because it was built on an entirely different way of generating computer animation or computer graphics that we now know today as ray tracing.
Yeah. I,
But at
I don't
that
think
time,
that Sorry, go for it.
I'm sorry, I'm going on. I'm not even giving you a chance.
No, I love this.
But the ray tracing was, they kind of invented it. And what it meant was that when you rendered the objects, they had a clarity and a believability, because there were mathematical formulas that were ensuring that your shading was accurate. Where up
Mm-hmm.
until that time, people were using a polygonal frame and
Mm-hmm.
doing approximations across the surface, and it had a little funky look to it. But when
Mm-hmm.
you look at Tron today, you're like, that still looks good.
Yeah. And I think I mean, we take it for granted. And I think that if we wanted to replicate Tron today using the same technology, we probably would not be able to do so, because now we've come a long way, of course, but um, it sounds almost like an impossible task. And was that the feeling also back then? Was it? What was the perspective on bringing such a movie to life, such an ambitious project? Did people feel like it was realistic? Was there some pushback? How was the situation?
The team of people that were working at it, and remember that the entire computer graphics community was a small community
Yeah.
at that time. I mean, you could in the order of 1,000 people.
Mm.
Really a small community. And we really felt the energy and the excitement of doing this groundbreaking work. And it seemed like every day there was a new exciting development.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to remember too how long ago this was. The way we used batch processing. That was decks of cards that
Yeah.
went through a batch processor, generated a file that went to another piece of equipment to draw it onto film. That was a Cellco film recorder. And then we took that film to a lab that processed it. We brought it back and then put it in an upright moviola, and that's how we
That's
were watching
amazing.
all of our tests.
That's
So,
crazy.
it
Which
was
year was it?
that was probably 83,
Right.
84, in that time frame. So it was, but every step of it, you felt like you were in the middle of something that
Mm-hmm.
was, remarkable. Because it intersected a few really exciting things. Not only was the technology really exciting, but it was film. And it was, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, in that case, it was Hollywood. So it had all the excitement and all
Mm-hmm.
the energy, and it was a very tight bunch of people that did all the work. I was in the R&D department, but we had an animation department. We had a couple of people that came from, they were negative cutters, because back then you
Wow.
cut film with negative. And he was an eccentric, a really, really talented, smart guy named Josh Pines, who brought a whole different mindset. And we really rallied around this kind of grassroots
Yeah.
community of people who were really excited about doing things that had never been done before.
That's so exciting. It sounds a lot like the feeling we have with AI today. I mean, it's a lot more people,
Yeah,
but it's a similar, dynamic world evolving every day.
and it's never stopped.
Yeah, that's it.
And
How
here we
when
are at this important moment in time,
yeah.
because this is a transition that I don't know that we fully appreciate the magnitude of yet.
We'll get there in a second, but I cannot help to ask you what happened. What made you create Blue Sky Studios? What was the timeline between those two?
Interesting history there. There was really only four companies that worked on Tron,
Mm-hmm.
and we did probably 75% of the animation. The other
Okay.
three companies did like the little bit. There was the
Mm-hmm.
sea of simulation. There were a few different things that were done. Robert Abel, Triple I, and Digital Effects were the three other companies.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that there was a wave of excitement, and then the industry started losing its footing. It didn't know how to go forward next. So what
Mm-hmm.
happened was a bunch of companies started closing, and there was sort of a complete collapse. And it happened
Really?
more than once. But we survived all of the ups and downs until the last one, and that was post Tron, because the owners of the company went Hollywood.
Right.
We had a director who was enthusiastic about the Hollywood lifestyle.
Mm.
And as a result, burned through tremendous amounts of cash.
Right.
And what happened was eventually they had to consider selling the company, and they tried to sell it. And we had a couple of partnerships with a Canadian company and but eventually it succumbed.
Mm.
And we had to close it down. And of the core people that were left, five of us were still working there.
Okay.
And we would meet at lunch and say, well, we should start our own company. We'll
Yeah.
start from scratch. And one of the brilliant scientists who was responsible for much of the intense math that was associated with ray tracing, an older Russian noble, he came from a very prominent family in Russia. He and a few of a really great engineer, myself and a couple of other people, we started Blue Sky, and we were able to bring back our colleague who had gone off to graduate school, Chris Wedge. And Chris was the director, and was responsible for much of the work that was done in Tron. And we started Blue Sky with a glimmer in our eye and a bunch of blank computers. I was teaching at Carnegie Mellon at the time,
Yeah.
and I was able to get a discount. So I
Nice.
brought back Sun Microsystem computers back to the lab, and we started building literally from a blank Unix operating system.
Wow.
We built a new generation, and we financed it ourselves.
Okay.
And then we were trying to raise money.
Yeah.
And that was comical, and it was hard. And then eventually we started like getting a commercial, our first couple of commercials, but they were like pills and soda, and not even really soda. What was the bottle? I think for the soda, but so. We struggled and struggled. It was about 7 years, and we started to get into a place where we were able to sustain the 6 original founders. There were 6 people who founded Blue Sky, and I was the system architect and building all of the infrastructure and all the way out to the interface, which included developing a programming language that they used practically until the last few years of
Really?
Yeah, it was a language called CGI Studio, and
Wow.
it was it borrowed from a lot of other programming languages, but it was designed to make it easy for animators to think about how to do, because you didn't have interactive user interfaces. You were still working from a keyboard
Of
for
course.
all this stuff. So that really is how we broke away. We saw that we had an opportunity, and we again just stayed at it until we got to a plateau. That was when we started really getting larger scale pieces. And I think the real breakthrough piece was an animated sequence done for MTV called Joe's Apartment.
Oh, right. That was before Ice Age or after?
Yeah. So the way the progression there went was, once we got we did Joe's Apartment, which really put us on the map. We then started pursuing longer form work, and we kept grinding away at stuff. That's when Fox found us,
Okay.
and that was at the time, just prior to the sale, or right around the time of the sale. I split off because what I was doing was pursuing much more interactive stuff. I wanted to do interactive animations. I wanted to do 2D interactive animation. So, it just happened that, my interest started shifting at the time that Fox bought the company, and they bought it. They got it at a fire sale price, because it was either we accept the deal or we lay everybody off.
Right. It tends to happen.
That was your choice.
Yeah.
You make it. So we did that. We sold it, and then they moved it to another location. Worked long and hard to try and get a production system that was a Hollywood-ready production system, and that's when they started doing the Ice Age movies.
Amazing.
Now, at that time, that's probably the 90s. I had broken off and was working in VR, early days of
How
VR.
come? What were you doing?
I was developing large-scale virtual worlds, which were shown in contemporary art centers all over the world, but they were built around literary narratives. So I went
Crazy.
back really to my art roots and
Yeah.
started creating what you could think of as operas, but with animated characters and really kind of unusual, not traditional game
Yeah. But
assets.
what was the display for that? I mean,
We used a couple of different things, and we used everything that was new.
yeah.
So a very common way we did it was a wall of video, and that sometimes
Okay.
was made up of video panels. Other times it was big bright projectors, and the we also had experimented with early helmets.
All right.
There's a couple of really interesting examples of it, including this one that you operated like a periscope, and
That's
you
funny.
walked around doing this with it, which was very fun. But it was limiting in terms of an exhibition environment. So using the large scale projection, and we put headphones on
Hmm.
the individual, and one person was standing in the middle of the gallery with a joystick, looking at a giant screen,
Amazing.
navigating the world. And we had a whole set of headphones along the back wall so people could listen to it. And
Yeah.
the works themselves were placed in an interactive sound sculpture. So
That's
we had
crazy.
this musical score that was sort of the underscore of the experience. It was interactive in that the more people would cluster, it would sort of arrange the sound a little bit. We
Really? That's
spatialized it,
amazing.
and then there were musical themes that were associated with the primary characters. So depending on where you were in the world and who you were engaging, the musical score was kind of evolving.
That's
And
so cool.
they were, yeah.
It is impressive how you've been, you know, always ahead, it sounds like. Um, to be working in VR at that time, that's impressive. But it sounds to me that it has been your art what has pushed you to basically try the things that you were feeling and imagining because of your art. And you needed more than what you had. Because of course, once you have had it and once you've started doing it, I imagine your mind was just going, okay, what's next? Not potentially not proactively or not consciously, but just that's where it goes. Do you think that that's what was happening, and that's why you were always one step ahead?
And I think you're absolutely right. And it really comes down to once an artist, always an artist. Your
Hmm.
mind is
Yeah.
just sort of like programmed a different way, and you look at everything as an extension of your practice. So,
Mm.
absolutely, I would agree with you that it has always been the DNA of my personality or my professional drive, and they've always been very closely connected to each other.
That's amazing. I want to take you now a bit closer to today and to talk about fashion technology. I mean, the first question I gotta ask is, did you see yourself working in fashion when you were growing up, when you were going early in your career days, and you did work with, you know, I think you mentioned textures, right? But what was that bridge? Was that expected, or was it a surprise for you?
It was a surprise. Now, I was predisposed, and my girlfriend, when I was in high school, her father was an art director at a big agency, an
Hmm.
important agency. He commissioned Andy Warhol to do illustrations for
Oh,
shoes. So
really? Wow.
it was,
Okay.
again, there was that overlap with art and
Yeah.
commerce, and you're not sure but what it meant was that I was able to see French Vogue, and I was looking at this stuff, going, "Wow,
Yeah.
wow, the creativity and the incredible layouts." And I was that's when I first met, or not met, I first saw the work of a famous photographer named Guy Bourdin, who
Okay.
is brilliant and really out there in terms of experimental, that had an impact on me. So there was a way in which I was triggered by it early on. Now, it never really emerged in my life, that
Hmm.
an interest in fashion. But after Blue Sky, I started another company, Possible Worlds. We did a bunch of really exciting 2D animation live for national broadcasts, and they were super fun and exciting.
Yeah.
And then having to weather yet another set of economic challenges,
Hmm.
I eventually said, I'm funding all of this research out of production. There's nothing harder. So maybe I should rethink the way I'm approaching this, and maybe find an academic situation where I can build a research center, a media innovation research center. I got a job at Lehman College in the Bronx in the art department, and was there 12 years building a media innovation center, and encountered that my colleagues were not on the same page.
Oh, okay. In what
And
sense?
there came a point where I said, I gotta go.
Okay.
And just at that moment, I was a tenured faculty member. I mean, so you can imagine what
Yeah.
motivated me.
Yeah.
But I sat down one night and I started scanning through job postings, and this opportunity came up at FIT, and they were looking for a set of qualities. I'm like, yeah, I fit that pretty well. So got the job, and we had a really interesting industry partner in it, a company called Infor. It's a big software company, enterprise software company. And they gave us capital to build out the lab and some operating money to be able to get sort of projects underway. And it was that moment when I realized of the profound importance of the intersection of media, fashion, and retail. And FIT as an environment is utterly remarkable. I mean, I don't know how to even express it. I mean, I taught at Carnegie Mellon, which was full of brilliant people, School of Visual Arts, Syracuse, lots of different places. I've never seen a student body like this.
Why? What has it? What
well,
does it
I
have?
often describe it as 85% women, all alpha. So they're all ambitious, hardworking, driven, creative. And then what you find is they're very nice and supportive of each other in a way that I just have not seen elsewhere. They're competitive. They want to win. They want to achieve, but not at the expense of the kind of social fabric that really is so impressive to see. And then with Dr. Brown, who's the president of the college, she had an inspired vision to put the innovation lab outside of the academic framework.
Interesting.
And that meant that you weren't kind of hobbled by the traditional challenges of academia, and I could operate more from my professional experience. And that's where the whole framework of the lab got established, and that's where we really started to realize that the important opportunity we have here is to serve as a bridge between academia and industry. And FIT is full of creative brilliance. They're intellectual, and it's faculty and students. There are remarkable amount of talent there. And putting them together to work collaboratively in a unified, towards a unified goal was really a powerful moment when we realized that.
Yeah, and what a smart move to do it in this outside of the norm, outside of the status quo. And it reminds me of how we use and people still do corporate innovation. Back at Deloitte when I was there, this whole idea of building startups outside of the mother company just to foster a different culture, allow for different things to happen. And that sounds like what you've been doing now, and it is quite powerful indeed.
And you're absolutely right about that. That the idea you have to be outside of the normal constraints of your everyday. Otherwise, the constraints of everyday dominate what your attention is. So, yeah, having it. We used to, at one point they called those innovation labs skunk works. But really, the idea that you take it out of the normal constraints and responsibilities so that you can try things and that your mind is kind of clear. Extremely valuable.
Yeah. How does it tell us a little bit more for those who are listening that do not know about the DTech Lab? Very briefly, how do you basically take those students, faculty, projects, and bring it all together in a separate environment? How those projects come alive, and how does it work?
Great question. We operate, all of our projects are industry sponsored, and that becomes a really important element. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we will meet an industry partner, and that could be, I speak at a lot of events around the world. We get a fair amount of press, and that generates a certain amount of interest.
Yeah.
So people will approach us with, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, something that they're challenged by or some opportunity that they'd like to explore. And we get a kind of a good understanding of what it is that they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is we identify the faculty members that we feel will be a good fit.
Okay.
And that could be from our business and technology school, our art and design program.
Mm-hmm.
We have a liberal arts program with some of the most brilliant scientists I've ever met, which
Amazing.
I cannot talk more about I can't talk enough about how brilliant and inspiring this woman, particularly Professor Theanne Shiros. But we also have a great graduate school. So we look at across the entire framework and see who the best faculty are. And then we look to them to identify student candidates. So
That's so
based
cool.
on their direct experience with the students,
Yeah.
they will make recommendations, and then we interview them. And in fact, my colleague, who's the managing director, Judith Bowens, having come from VP of stores for Barney's New York, she has an amazing skill at talking to students, understanding them, and seeing how well they will operate within an innovation environment, which is messy and imprecise. And stops and starts and redirects are all part of the game. So we will then put that team together. And the way we work with our partner is that I built out what I call a term sheet, which is based on our discussion. I identify objectives and goals. Then I talk about our assumptions. Then I give them a budget and a timeline. And then we go back and forth and refine that. And then once we've got that nailed down, then we go out and start recruiting our teams. And then we establish a fairly brisk series of cadence calls because we work very interactively with our partners. And so we're on a call every week with them as we explore different ideas. So depending on the project, the relationship and their involvement can vary.
Yeah.
We just are finishing now a project for Uniqlo. And launching it in their flagship store on Fifth Avenue in New York. It's a collaboration where our team of students developed a collection, a small collection, but of pieces that were constructed from apparel that was either damaged or returned or was in their warehouse, but could otherwise not be sold. So what we did was pick through the pieces and develop a system by which they could do this in store, creating new pieces that use the same, in a sense, you might think of it as a formula, but they're using different fabrics, or they're combining a different jacket with another jacket, and it's really
that's so exciting. And it is like, is it a digital system? Is it something that
no? It was actually this was purely manual. What we did again. Although the DTech lab is very much design and technology, one of the things that really distinguishes it is its framework is built around collaboration and transdisciplinary practice. That means because in that project, not only did we have fashion designers, but we had our advertising and digital design team, which was part of this. So it is that collaboration between creative teams that allows us to bring all these pieces together. So the advertising team did an amazing job creating a whole messaging campaign that's going to be in stores to promote these. And it's done very symbiotically and in close relationship with each other, not them working over here and those guys working over there. We meet every week as a group and go over the challenges.
That sounds very exciting. And I love how the project, you're focused on the collaboration, you're focused on the goal. It's not about fitting in just whatever technology, but doing what makes sense. And innovating doesn't mean digital always, right?
It means digital.
It means let's see what get us there. What is it that we want to achieve? And I find also extremely fascinating. So the students and faculty, they can just at any moment get a message from you saying, we have this project. Do you want to, they don't have to be part of the lab technically.
No.
That's cool. That's amazing. That must be so exciting for them to suddenly wake up to this message of there is this cool project that might be happening. Do you want to join?
And and we were very good about getting press. Plus the fact we've had projects where we've had the famous rapper Ludacris, Chris Bridges. We did a project for him. So
Wow.
there they are, like on camera with Ludacris, which is
That's so
just an
cool.
he was remarkably charming and nice and so great to work with. He launched an animated children's TV series that had CGI characters, and we designed a collection of apparel for the CGI characters that got produced
Amazing.
as toys by Mattel and product by Target. So,
That's so cool.
so it creates, and I'm going to also talk about one other key element that really helps that really differentiates the lab
Please.
and this is something that I have to really credit Judith Bowens, I mentioned earlier, the managing director. We start with kindness.
That's great.
We start with kindness. It's all a matter of respect and appreciation and understanding and compassion and thoughtfulness. And what a difference that makes in the
Yeah.
way people collaborate.
How do you enact that? How do you practically
We tell them right at
embed
the
that?
beginning. We start with kindness.
That's
And we
great.
talk to them about how, you may have a challenge. Let's share us. Don't, go off in the weeds. Come to us. Let's talk about what you're and if we've rarely had conflicts between students. One project I can think of, and it was really minor, and then you demonstrate it. Then you demonstrate your thoughtfulness. You're sensitive to their schedule, sensitive to all of the challenges that they face, and you work very interactively with them to try and find a comprehensive solution. But it really, not only do we tell them, we also live it.
That's great. And thank you for saying that. Thank you for highlighting that, because it is very inspiring to see that being a value in a successful setup, because we are so used to seeing or thinking that what makes something successful is the complete opposite of kindness. And
and the fashion industry is not known for it.
right. I mean, but even if you look at technology, which is at the other side of your sector, it's also not known for being kind. And now I think more and more companies start to bring this value from the beginning. But I can tell you, I mean, as I'm in the early stages of founding my company, and it is one of the things that I fight every day with myself, not to let myself go into this loophole and sorry, and to this chain of thought of you should not be that kind because you're probably not going to make it.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think it's really great to hear you say that because you do struggle with it. You do
Yeah.
figure that only the mean survive.
Yeah.
And there is a demonstration of the effectiveness of that. But how do you live with yourself?
Yeah.
And
Is that a value that you've had since the beginning of your career, or do you think you have evolved into it?
I've always been nice, and that's just who I am.
Yeah.
I came from a really gregarious Italian family, and so much love and laughing and carrying on, and so it just became me. Now, I often struggled with the question that you confront is, why is he getting that attention? He's miserably mean and abusive, really. But I don't know how to do it. I don't really know how to go about it. Plus, we all get a little sharp and a little, testy now and again. But that's not the same thing as operating with a sense of kindness and respect and collaboration.
Absolutely. It's funny, the times where I've tried to act it, which is very different as having ravages, as you say, purposefully, when you need to have to be more straightforward and more strict and whatever. But the times where I've tried to change who I am, those are the times where I've failed most, beautifully. Yeah, I mean, it is really, and it took me a few years to learn that and to say, why am I trying to be someone that I'm not just because I think that's how you get to be successful. So it's really encouraging to hear you say that, and it is. I think it's great that it is a value that you're passing on to the students very early on. They know there is another way, even in a fast-moving, demanding setup as the one that you have created.
Yep.
So that's
And they
fantastic.
take that with them, like you're saying,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's great. They're very vocal. They stay in close touch with us and are very appreciative for everything that we've done for them.
That's great.
Because it really gave them on ramps into industry in a way that they would never really have had just coming out along with so many others.
Yeah, it's like being at a very innovative, cool, but also um challenging consulting company,
That's
that
right.
where you get projects that are, that are complex, but that are also exciting. And that is something that is it's precious. But when you think about, the work that you do and the state where we are in terms of technology moving so fast with tech giants like Google and OpenAI at the forefront, um, what are your thoughts on how that conversation is being driven? And most importantly, where do you think innovation and disruption in the fashion industry is going to come from? Is it going to come from tech giants? Is it going to come from brands? Is it academia?
So I mean, my personal feeling is that we're heading for an inflection point.
Mm.
I think everybody sort of feels that. So
Hmm.
I don't think I'm alone. But yes, the consolidation of all industries into a limited number of players
Hmm.
eliminates choice,
Hmm.
eliminates creativity, and it serves the interest of very few.
Hmm.
So I think ultimately there's going to have to be a different business model.
Mm.
Businesses need to always be driven by profit. CEO salaries being pegged to shareholder value, little damaging,
Hmm.
little
Hmm.
damaging, I'd say.
Hmm.
Having everything being determined by shareholder
Mm.
value, again, damaging to core values, to real people,
Hmm.
and they are just chum that are used and, in a sense, not even managed the same way a farmer would manage its livestock.
That is
They're
true.
not
Yeah.
cared for and not
Yeah.
considered an asset. They're just a source.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that kind of context is a challenging one. Now, what I see and I'm excited about in terms of innovations is the emergence of powerful technology in the hands of individual and emerging designers.
Yeah.
This is a really great and exciting opportunity. And the time is not quite here yet, but you
Hmm.
can see it sort of emerging on the horizon. And important developments like on-demand manufacturing, local
Hmm.
production on-demand manufacturing does so many things. It really
Hmm.
means that an emerging designer can launch a collection without having $500,000 to get started.
Yeah. Yeah.
And only produce a limited number of items. So they have the freedom to be much more inclusive in their sizing. They have
Hmm.
the freedom to be to really structure they're not wasting money shipping stuff all over the world or warehousing it. They're only producing it as it's needed. Now, there's still some advances that are needed, and there will always be a need for large volume production. That's
Yeah.
not going to go away. But the fact that there's another ecosystem that grows up to create a little bit of contrast and diversity, this is a powerful and exciting thing. And technology is going to be very useful. And AI is going to be, if AI is going to be of benefit, it's going to be
Hmm.
of benefit there,
Yeah,
from my
absolutely.
perspective.
No, I agree. And I mean, fashion is probably one of the most difficult industries to penetrate and to, as an individual, as a, independent designer, independent brand.
Yeah.
Wow, it's so. I mean, I had not been exposed to that world until very recently, until that trip where we met. Um, I was surrounded by young, talented designers, and the the challenges that they face are just
Yeah.
immense. That I cannot think of. There are other few industries that could relate to that. And if AI contributes to something, and it is that, as you say, that changes their world. Do you
So in
think
the
that? Yeah.
design side, I see that happening. Certainly 3D virtual prototyping has really been amazing in the
Yeah.
way it's allowed you to be much more facile in your design iteration process because you can experiment with color blocking and placement of prints, as well as modifying your designs and doing some of the preliminary fittings before you actually cut a piece of fabric. But then another thing that I find, and so in the manufacturing cycle, this on demand is vitally important, and live shopping, very powerful mechanism for individuals to reach audiences. They build their social media framework. They join forces with a couple of other social media followers, and all of a sudden you have an audience where you're in control of the product. And we've used a product called Bamboozer, which is a Swedish company that develops a lot, and it's wonderful. It's it's fun, and it's in the hands, and the IP belongs to the creators. You're not
That's key.
surrendering yourself to others.
Yeah. How do you, a bit of a controversial question, Michael, how do you balance the potential of live shopping with the challenges and the dangers of overconsumption? That's a discussion that we have today a lot.
Constantly have to face that. And then, when you're doing live shopping, you don't necessarily have to be selling new product. You can sell upcycle product. You can sell, so there's lots of ways to really, it's really a matter of what you care about. And it's a powerful way to reach your audience using enterprise technology so that you have a very smooth transaction and a smooth shopping experience, but in a way that where you can be creative. So, overconsumption is a big problem. There's no question about it. And I hear people say that average garments only worn like 3 times. I'm not sure who's doing that. Most of my stuff is 5 years old. I must have worn it 200 times.
Michael, we might be, both of us, we might be overliers here. We might be on the edge.
Particular outliers, yeah. But, I like my stuff. But there is an important, really important point that you're making there that really is a subtle challenge that we face. And I often describe it as we need to reprogram desire. Marketing has programmed desire to consume.
Yeah.
Having a different sense of what is satisfying and what gives you pride and what allows you to demonstrate a certain amount of prestige and accomplishment has to be structured differently.
Yes.
You have to internalize a different way of activating those sensations.
I agree. I think I believe in that. And I think I feel it coming from the consumers. When we've chatted with people that they just don't buy new anymore. There is a pride in buying secondhand, and I think, as you say, that's a real shift in how we consume when we think about products in a different way.
Absolutely. And it is really thinking about products in a different way and thinking about what ownership means. The rental economy, that's a very brisk economy and allows you to really have access to very high style, couture, really, almost.
Yeah.
But you don't own it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you really need to own it?
Yeah, I think that has been challenged. The ownership model, it's a big topic. I mean, if you look at cars, I mean, here in Europe, owning a car, it's becoming a thing of I mean, it is. A lot of people still have cars, but it is so easy to rent it, for the minute. And we sometimes fantasized at the team here, thinking how amazing would it be if the value of a garment would be based on how many times it has been passed on from one person to the other. And then you take pride on saying this has come a long way and it's still there. It has a history, there is an emotional component to it, but there is also, every time it's passed on to another person, you are basically reducing or avoiding the carbon footprint of that person.
Absolutely.
Potentially buying.
And I do that with my technology.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm starting to buy from Back Market, which is a really excellent source of it's warranted and it's not first run. It's a secondary piece, which So I think and we're going to see more of that theme and new business models, and some of that also is what really has to happen is that the conceptualization and ideation in and around business models that really leverage that drive and that impulse, because that's a big market and it's only being nibbled at. And
Yeah.
but I think it's a really terrific opportunity.
Yeah, I think companies and startups and brands are starting to realize the shift on the consumer perception. We're miles away. I mean, we still have many challenges. Um, that's why Shein is one of the top fashion companies today. But we're I think we're gonna get there as consumers, and I hope so. For first and foremost.
Yeah, I remain optimistic, and as I do what I can in my own life, which
Yeah.
influences, just my son. He thinks differently about it, and it has to be through your own direct value system that you make the immediate change. But then we're in a position, luckily, in the lab to actually foster that next generation of leader who is tuned to that way of thinking and brings those insights sometimes to really big brands and helps them start to really shift their focus so that they're
Mm-hmm.
promoting a level of sustainability. Again, you're not going to get 100% on anything, but a more balanced world is a better and a healthier world.
Yeah, absolutely. You've talked about how excited you are about manufacturing, about design, and the effect of technology in that part of the process, of the value chain of fashion. Is there another aspect of it, of that value chain, that you're excited about, and the impact of technology that it might have on it, that you would like to mention?
Well, I do. I love live shopping.
Yeah, live shopping.
I think it's been fun. I've done some interesting shows, and I'm seeing it's very successful in China, and I think it has some pretty good strong foothold in Europe.
Yeah.
You see a bunch of brands using it. The United States still a little bit not sure how to approach it yet, but
Mm.
I see it as a really powerful way of combining entertainment and shopping in a kind of seamless world. The other thing is, and then we look at how entertainment is going to evolve in general. I mean, online entertainment, it's a little isolating.
Mm.
So it's a
Mm-hmm.
little isolating, but I do see a time where there is something that's a little bit more social.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, I worked with a very famous special effects director named Doug Trumbull. He was the special effects director for 2001. And we were working
Yeah.
on a project together. And he created a model in his mind of what he thinks is a good way to sort of combine interactivity. And he said it's like a horse race. Everybody's socializing, they're having drinks, they're having a nice time. Race is going to run. Everybody focuses. There's all
Yeah.
this interaction, lots of excitement, and then there's a break, and you're back to socializing. So, as a model for combining social and interactive and media, it's an interesting concept. I mean, of
Mm-hmm.
course, that's only one, and it's
Mm-hmm.
but when you start thinking about how to leverage the power of human interaction and the pleasure and satisfaction in connecting on a
Mm-hmm.
one-to-one basis, and find a way to have technology support that and
Mm-hmm.
provide access to things in a way that creates a very kind of I, maybe it's idealized, but it's a different retail environment than
Yeah.
stores being warehouses.
Absolutely, and I think it's beautiful, honestly, how it brings together two things you said earlier. First of all, the idea of I think this vision of entertainment, if it's gonna happen digitally, it has to be on a VR environment, right, where you can actually be surrounded, even if you're at home, of people. But then also brings
AR as well. I mean,
AR, yeah, yeah. Let's say
working with the virtual, yes,
mixed reality kind of like
yes.
setup. But then also what I find really moving and beautiful is that the importance of those social interactions, which is something that you also said of what is impressive for you about the FIT's culture, that supporting each other, connecting with each other. um it is also something that I believe changes how the humans that we become, if that's in our baseline, and what I feel sometimes we need a lot more of. And it would be amazing if technology can enable that, instead of removing that from the equation, which sometimes it feels like it.
It does really feel like it.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of concern about it. But you're right that within the right kind of environment where you value those things, you can then start to create a pattern, and people start to understand and think about how collaboration in real life is very powerful and heartwarming. In our world, we don't have enough heartwarming.
Yeah. I think if we would have, the fact that we also met in person,
Yes,
I
I agree
think
with you.
led to this conversation. And it was, I mean, by the way, you are an amazing person to talk to. And I'm sure it happens digitally as well, that warmth that you have. But in person, it creates such an impact. And after the pandemic, we kind of like forgotten about the power of being in person and connecting in person. So it's going to be a challenge and something that we have to figure out as a society of how to keep alive in our digital age and world.
I agree with you,
Michael,
because that dinner was really lovely. We had a lively conversation of people all around us.
Yes.
Chef was coming over. We were laughing. We're having fun. Try doing that on Zoom.
Yeah, it's not possible. By the way, shout out to the German Fashion Council.
They did
and
a
Sketch
great job. I thought that
for
was a
organizing
really
that.
great event.
Yeah, it was really amazing. We gotta wrap it up, Michael. But I wanna ask you one last question, a personal one. We've talked a lot about values, but I still wanna ask you about what is that one key lesson or value that guides your daily life and work. If you can summarize that into one.
I can start with, it starts with kindness. And collaboration is extremely powerful, especially within a framework of kindness. And being open and agile. You have an idea, you got to let it squirm around a little bit before it takes its final form. So remember that and this is something I say to students: life is a process, not an event, or success is a process, not an event. So
that is true.
It's an ongoing, constant engagement with challenges and opportunities, and you just learn to take that in as part of what is exciting and fun.
And your career is a living proof of that, of how you gotta let life unfold and create something amazing and impressive. So, Michael, where do people can find information about the DTech Lab, follow you?
If you go to FIT's page, you can find it that
They'll
way.
find it.
You can find me on LinkedIn, just under my name, and just use the word fashion. For some reason, I show up first.
That's great. That says a lot.
I don't know if it'll always be that way, but it is that way right now. So you can connect with me that way. Love to talk to anybody, and happy to share whatever we're doing, and let's see who wants to collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it was my pleasure was mine. And Jaime, it's really nice, really thoughtful questions, and about things that are, they're emotional, they're important, they're at the core of humanity. And I think I recognize that in our conversation, that's you. You're really centered around that, and that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you for enabling me on that and empowering me to do so. Michael, it was a pleasure. We'll stay in touch. And I wish you the best, and to the team at the DTech Lab as well.
Thank you very much. Great talking with you.